I love the new media aspect of this program. It's a nice convergence, as they say in the trade, between celluloid and digits online. Scott assures me that he needs no introduction, but I'm going to indulge me just a moment to introduce our panel, including Scott Foundas, our moderator this evening. I want to say that we're also pleased at the Writers Guild to be partnering with the New York Film Festival at Lincoln Center on this Writing New York series of 2. This is our first partnership in connection with the festival, and we're very pleased to do it. We are the Writers Guild East, which means east of the Mississippi, and we do have members outside of New York, but a lot of folks in New York have written a lot of New York movies, and that will be the focus this evening. Scott is now here he's the Associate Program Director for the Film Society at Lincoln Center, where he's also a contributing editor to Film Comment. I'm sure you've read his work. Before that, he was at LA Weekly for 6 years, where he was film editor and chief film critic, and in 2010 won the Film Critic of the Year award in LA, and his work has been published in a number of other places, and he's been on panel juries at Cannes, Venice, Sundance, and et cetera. Our panelists are distinguished members of the Writers Guild of America East, and they've written many films. I'm just going to touch on some of their New York films in connection with the theme of tonight, which is, does the shoe still fit if it ain't got that grit, or something a little more grammatic than that. The quintessential urban landscape is what it's really about. But next to Scott is Stephen Schiff. I think, Stephen, your quintessential New York film was Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, and David Levien, next to him, The Girlfriend Experience and Rounders are part of your New York oeuvre, and Brian Koppelman, another distinguished Writers Guild East member, in addition to Girlfriend Experience and Rounders, Solitary Man, and David Koepp, who's written a number of films you're familiar with. The New York pieces include Premium Rush, Ghost Town, Panic Room, Spider-Man, and Carlito's Way. Scott. Thank you.
I just want to say, as a writer myself, I feel very small on this panel with these very distinguished guests. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here tonight. Before we get to this, very well-worded topic of the evening, I thought maybe a good point to start would actually be to ask you all if you think of yourselves primarily or in any respect as, quintessentially or specifically New York writers and what that means. I think that Brian, you and David are the only native New Yorkers up here, if I'm right about that.
If Long Island counts.
Yeah. So, go wherever you want with that. Starting here with Stephen.
I've lived in New York most of my adult life. And before I became a screenwriter, I wrote for The New Yorker. So that's sort of New Yorky of me. But I'm from Littleton, Colorado, so I can't really claim to be a New Yorker. When I came to New York, I immediately realized that everyone in this town has to have 2 areas of knowledge. The thing they do, which they have to do very, very well, and we have to have New York knowledge. You have to know New York to be in New York and be a New Yorker. So that was something I had to acquire very quickly. And, you have to osmose it, and you don't even know, when you've crossed over from small-town Colorado boy to New York person. But it took me a while. I think I'm there.
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't walk around self-identifying as a New York writer. I live in Connecticut now, but at the beginning of my career, about 15 years ago, I realized that we were, because when we go to Los Angeles for meetings and walk into rooms, we're like a curio. Like they're not sure if we're going to rob them or, steal something beyond the water they offer you. So we were fortunate in that when we come to town, people who would ordinarily probably blow us off for a couple weeks at a time have to fit us in, or else, we're going to miss them on that swing.
And certainly like a high percentage of our movies have to do with New York and are set in New York or have to do with characters who are from New York. And we, because Dave and I are writing and directing partners. It wasn't the royal.
Right.
I wouldn't. I think you spend a lot of your time as a screenwriter trying not to be identified as any certain kind of writer, because that's their job and they do it very quickly. Anything you do well, you're that kind of writer. anything you do poorly, you're not allowed to be that kind of writer anymore. I'm the kind of New Yorker for whom New York was a goal. I grew up in the Midwest and lived in LA for a while, and then moved here about 12 years ago. And I did notice moving here, you just, it's more fertile. You get more ideas. You're not in the same soup as everybody else in LA, so it's just your ideas are a little bit different. And when you do go to LA, there's a novelty about you, which is, oh, you're in town, we should try to get together, as opposed to, you're in town, you're always in town, you make me sick, I'm so tired of you. So I think it's a great place for a writer to live, and LA will always be a part of your life if you're a Hollywood writer, and if you write movies in the United States, whether they're mainstream or independent, you're a Hollywood writer because that's where the money is. But it doesn't have to be where you live. It can just be part of you.
Well, I'll just, to follow up on that, David, when you talk about, the inspiration, that you get from New York, is that specifically talking about stories and characters that would then be in New York stories, or is it just in a sort of general way when you talk about what the city does for you as a writer?
I think it's a general way. It's a lifestyle way. In a lot of things that have been very well observed, that you live close to people and you live among people, and you're not, LA is a car and driving into a garage and taking an elevator to an office. And I live in a house in New York, but it's 17 feet wide, and I share walls with people. So even though I have a lot of space, I have a lot of neighbors, and you deal with them constantly, and they're different kinds of people. So it's all those things that people love and hate about New York, that you're in the mix with lots of people. So,
but then also specifics. I mean, think about the movies that are New York movies that Dave and I have made. Rounders was because someone invited me to an underground poker club that just existed here. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was very specific because all the people that populate that movie are amalgams or sort of not amalgams of people that we ran into in the middle of the night in these poker clubs back when it was very illegal. And, that was not something we were going to pick up anywhere else. So in that case, it was quite specific.
But that's it. In New York, there's a swim. In LA, you go to a party, and there's a producer, and there's also another producer, and there's also another producer, and there's an actor, there's also an agent, and you're talking about the business.
Those are fancy parties.
Those are fancy parties, yeah. But in New York, there's there's a writer, but there's an artist, there's someone from TV, there's a dancer, there's people from Wall Street, there's this swim, there's this mix, and they're talking about things other than the movie business, and that's feeding you. And they're talking in languages that are different. I mean, there are more different languages in New York. You're hearing a writer needs to hear lots of sounds and needs to digest them and needs to steep in them, and that's part of being a New York writer, I think.
Well, I'll jump to sort of, I guess, the $64,000 question, which is related to what you were just saying, because I think Dana from the Writers Guild sent us all this clip of David Simon, the creator of The Wire, on some panel or giving some talk somewhere where he was really railing against New York as having sold out and been totally dominated now by rich people and Wall Street, and that Baltimore has the
collective will. I'm sorry, that makes me really it makes me crazy when people say that.
He's from Baltimore, isn't he?
Yeah, he's saying Baltimore has the real grit and that's a real city, and
when New York was really gritty, when it was really gritty, it was like 1690.
Gangs of New York time.
Yeah, people died in like their late 30s, and I just missed that. It was so romantic, I mean, it's fantastic.
Well, I guess the question is just in the time that you guys have been in New York and writing in New York and writing about New York, what are the changes that you've observed, and do you feel that the city has risked becoming overly gentrified, or that this variety of types of people and types of stories has diminished because of the high cost of living?
I like not dying. I think that's a better way for New Yorkers to live. New York, the romance of New York, like in the Ford to New York drop dead era, the era when New York was almost bankrupt, and Times Square was sleazy, and that as a romance is nice as a romance. In retrospect, a lovely thing. in reality at the time, I don't think it was a lovely thing. I think we're all glad to be able to walk down the street without looking behind us all the
I
time.
miss sleazy Times Square personally. It was
You know,
fun.
Times
get a
Square you don't
fa-
want to go to
You
now,
get a
but
fake ID when you were a kid. Now,
But the thing,
have to make it on
thing
your
is,
computer,
we
I
make up
guess.
stories. We can make it up. We can make up sleazy New York too.
But the question that I think you're really trying to ask is, when we talk about that specifically New York inspiration,
Yeah.
first of all, it's hard to answer that question without getting into real Barton Fink territory, earnest territory. But look, I mean, David Simon has clearly spent his life. First of all, he was reporting, so it's reportage for him, right,
Yeah.
the whole way,
Yeah,
and he's a
journalism.
genius. But I would say, it depends where you walk around. I mean, is the New York he's talking about, does it end on 96th Street? I mean, no, of course, New York still has any story you want to go find. If you're somebody whose idea of the way to go about this is to find interesting people and interesting situations that really exist as your jumping off point, I can't think of a better place in the world than this city to do that still.
Yeah, and I think that question is also flawed because it tries to sort of rank the validity of human experience. I mean, New York changes as the country changes, and maybe a movie about a teenage whore in Times Square in the 70s was genius because it was so of its time, and there were a lot of teenage whores in Times Square in the 70s. But the country changes, the city changes. And as the country stratifies and poor people get poorer and rich people get richer, there's probably a fantastic New York movie waiting to be born that's like A Tale of Two Cities, but it's the same city,
Could be about the sit-in at Wall Street, maybe.
Yeah,
Could be
I mean,
Wall
there-
Street 3 could be.
The stories change. The city changes, the country changes, the people change, and the stories change. So,
But New York's
I hate
always
that
kind of,
lost
I mean,
rich shit.
I think, it's a false premise also because, I mean, look at, what year did Whit Stillman make Metropolitan?
89 or 90.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
Boom, there it is. He had it right there.
yeah, I knew he had it. He knows. But I mean, that was a time of a lot of different stuff going on. And look at that movie that showed already this sort of stratification happening, right? And
Look at movies of the 30s, in which you rarely saw the grid of the street. You saw this sort of country, this nightclub, Art Deco, all white, all dancing all the time atmosphere. And we always have. There's very little room for that kind of movie now. Everyone sort of thinks grit sells in a certain way, even if there's no grit. But there are a lot of good non-gritty stories to be told that might have a hard time getting made. And a lot of sort of romantic comedies about New York that come out of L.A. and that depict a New York I don't entirely recognize. For instance,
Yeah.
Journalists with enormous apartments overlooking the Hudson River. What New York is that? And there's no one there to say, that New York doesn't exist. No, we should, if we want jobs as studio executives, but we do not.
Or sometimes when you see L.A. doubling for New York, they're supposed to be in Midtown, but it's clearly Culver City and that sort of thing.
Toronto, Vancouver.
But I was going to say, I know we're coming at this from a storytelling point of view, but I think the experience of making movies sort of tracks the economic cycle more than the storytelling itself. A while back, you could make movies in New York, and then for a long period of time, because the economy was booming, the Canadian dollar was so cheap that everything was up there, and then you were forced with making New York movies in Canada, which is a really difficult endeavor. I don't want to say a bankrupt endeavor, because you can possibly pull it off, but it's really hard. And now that things are in a more difficult straits, suddenly it doesn't make any sense to go there. The Canadian dollar is worth more practically.
Yeah, they're actually making films here now.
Yeah,
to
they're
save
coming
money.
here. So you can make a show or a movie in New York, and that's a cool thing, whether or not, some of the buildings around are nicer now.
Well, let me ask kind of the flip side of the question. I'm actually thinking about you guys talking about going out to L.A. and sort of being regarded as exotics. Is there danger in writing New York stories, in having them not travel outside of New York? I'm thinking about the fact that Woody Allen is really now having for the first time a movie that's a hit in the flyover states, and that when you look back at some of the New York movies, I was just doing some research on Sidney Lumet's Bye Bye Braverman, you know, from the 70s, and some of the reviews said, will anyone understand it west of the Hudson, you know, because it's so both very New York specific and also very New York Jewish specific. I mean, is that something you think about at all when you're writing? You know, is anyone going to get this if they're not from New York?
I think New York is a lingua franca, though. You know, I think, you know, New York is recognizable all over the world. Disproportionately, things are set in New York, always have been. The romance of New York, you know, has existed so long that it's almost in the sort of cultural subconscious. And in a certain way, you know, you don't dumb down in that way for audiences, because audiences kind of want to feel that there's something to some secret going on that they want to find out. You know, an audience wants to go into a world that's not theirs, really. You know, that has, you know, like the world of Rounders, for instance. You know, that was not geared towards poker players. You know, that was geared toward a wider.
What's great in like Rounders, for example, is you're watching the movie. I remember seeing it the first time vividly. I didn't know what the fuck they were talking about, but I knew they knew. And it's like all good tech talk. It's really specific. So you know it's true, and then you can get the feelings from it, and then you figure out some of it because you're not an idiot. But you know it's the same with a place specific movie. You don't. It travels if it's small and accurate, and you know it's really important to the people in the movie, and then you feel that.
Well, speaking of specific places, do you guys, when you're writing, do you think about specific locations? Are you sometimes inspired by specific locations, and that leads into a scene, which leads into something?
I don't know. That's a really great question. We haven't talked to many other writers about it, but we completely do. We're often inspired by very specific things, and then, like if there's a scene set in a restaurant, I mean, we usually think about the exact restaurant and then try to shoot. I mean, on Solitary Man, we tried to shoot in all the places that we were thinking of. And we were able to sometimes, and sometimes we weren't able to. But yeah, the more, I mean, in any kind of writing endeavor, it feels like the more specific you have the idea in your head, the better chance you have of communicating it. I mean, to us, it feels that way. I
did a movie last year, shot a movie last year called Premium Rush. It's about a bike messenger in New York. And so John Camps, who I wrote it with, it's a map movie in that he's got to get from one place to another over the course of the movie. So we went out and walked the whole route of the movie and just wrote down, because there's going to be chases and excitement and stuff, and we wrote down all the stuff we saw so that we could get ideas for our set pieces. And it's great. Like there's a parking garage on 94th that goes all the way through that we shot, because that gave us the idea that that's how he tries to, you know, so it was a real luxury that you're on the sound stage. It's a gigantic sound stage and you're already on it, and it's already filled with extras and props. So all you got to do is go out and pick the best extras and props and then write a scene around it. And at one point we're going along, and there were guys, we were in Midtown, and there was guys walking across the street with a giant pane of glass, and we just said, well, that's too on the nose. We can't use the giant piece of glass, even though it really
The Three Stooges did that.
No one would believe it.
Well, actually, I guess for those of you, because I think everyone on the panel, except for Stephen so far anyway, has directed in New York as well as written New York. Is there a different energy directing a film here than there is when you're on a set someplace else? And can you talk about what that's like?
Yeah, it's New York is, well, it's very much like Sean Penn in that it's you know, it's genius, it's brilliant, it's kind of an asshole, and it's gonna throw shit at you every day.
This is going out on the web, by the way, right now.
Sean Penn is
Sean
watching
is already
this,
on his way
actually.
here to kick your ass.
You better close with genius.
That was why
also.
I paused, but you know, I figured what the hell. But he is genius, and you know, and then so you go through the whole experience, and I never directed Sean Penn, and
never will.
apparently
Won't be
never
now.
will. But the movie I wrote that he was in, you know, huge pain in the ass all the way, and then you look at the movie and you say, wow, holy cow. And New York is the same way. You know, it's really difficult, and it never does exactly what you expect it to, and you know, and you just curse it the whole time, and you come home and fall in bed and just are too exhausted.
Yeah, you get to stay at home though. That's a huge
you
plus.
do sleep. At least you're collapsing, crying in your own bed, and then you look at the cut of your movie or your dailies, and you're like, God damn, it's beautiful, you know, and it's great and unexpected and better than you hoped.
Also, if you're making movies about like sort of real things, I mean, you're able to pull from actors who are here.
Yeah.
and they just bring a
And
certain
extras
kind of
as well.
yeah, New York kind of authority, personality. That's very hard to fake in other places.
And yeah, you get, the crews are also pretty special here. And they're awesome technically, they're hardworking, but, you know, they're not going to call you sir for the most part, which is still a custom in some places. They may, you know, say, go fuck yourself, sir. So,
And since you're making your office in the middle, when you're shooting on the street, as we were constantly on the bike movie, you're making your office in the middle of where everybody goes and walks and has a right to be. And people will stop next to your chair and say, what are you, some kind of director or something? And you're trying to think and you go, yeah. And they go, I don't know, man. And it bugs you like the rest of the day, but you're the whole time, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so you kind of like, I don't know, it sort of feeds you after a while. You ask passersby, what do you think? A little to the left, right? A little to the left.
If I can ask a somewhat more serious question, because we just passed the 10th anniversary of September 11th, and after 10 years ago there was a lot of reporting about movies that had scenes of the World Trade Center digitally removed, and was it too soon to make movies about the events of September 11th? Are there other sort of less specific ways in which you feel that the climate of New York has changed, and the stories that one may feel compelled to tell about New York has been affected by the aftermath of September 11th? For whoever wants to
Schiff,
jump
you used
in.
to write for the New Yorker. Why don't you take this one?
get some
Stop, I'm
social
completely
context
stumped.
going.
May I just say no? Next question. I think we all live in the the soup of September 11 all the time. It changed everything in this town. It changed everything in this country forever. It changed all of our lives. It changed every life in this room. It changed every life in the audience. So it's not, and in that way, I don't think it's a particularly New York question. When you're downtown in the area that it was, that same kind of site-specific feeling that inspires any writer, that comes off that place. That comes into you, and you work from it. You don't know how you're working from it. You're working from it, in a million different ways. There's a feeling of this country exists in a different light. There's a feeling that all of its citizens exist in a different light. There's a feeling, we are thought of this way, and we talk about it, and we cope with it, and we live our lives that way. That's all there all the time now for us.
Yeah.
And
We
and
had
will
two
be.
specific brushes with it. One, in this movie that we did called Knockaround Guys, there's a shot of the main character driving on the BQE or something, and the World Trade Center's in the background. And then by the time the movie came out, everything had happened, and there was like a little mini debate over whether we should leave it in or take it out. And we left it in, thus marking it a period film in a way. And then another thing that happened was, so that movie was in the can during 9/11. We were in the middle of writing a White House comedy. We were on page 75 when 9/11 struck. And when we came back to our office in the city like a week and a half later to sit down and write, suddenly that was not funny anymore. Like White House comedy, government stuff, it just like lost its laughs for a long, long time. And we had to put it away for a while and break it out months later. It's probably still not funny.
I would also like to ask you if you guys have any, well, I'm sure you have them, so you can just tell us what they are, the personal favorite New York movies or New York screenwriters.
Sweet Spill of Success.
Oh, yeah.
Good one.
I win.
And say something for people who may not know. Say something about that and why that is a favorite or a quintessential.
Well,
New
that's
York
a
script.
movie, that takes place in the kind of the world of nightclubs and the sort of music and entertainment in New York, and at a certain moment, the 50s. It's sort of smoking and drinking and a little bit sort of Rat Packy era, but it's also it's just full of New York language. It's steeped in the way New Yorkers talk at each other, the way New Yorkers insinuate, the way New Yorkers sort of get under one another's skin, and in ways that are funny and horrifying at the same time. The way we love one another but double deal one another at the same time. That's all very, that's an example of New York universalizing. A movie in which people can be watching something that's very specifically New York and identifiably so, and could say, this, this what I'm watching is not happening elsewhere, but in some way it's happening everywhere. It's happening in me.
Are we going in order? You want to jump around?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I won't take them all by just naming a list of people. How about Taxi Driver? Obviously, a ton of Scorsese movies are classic New York movies. He's quintessential, and Schrader, is he from Minnesota or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Michigan.
He's honorary all the way. I mean, clearly, he's grandfathered in.
Yeah.
I left some for you.
Thanks. She's Gotta Have It. Spike's first movie, and I think he's one of the, arguably like in our time, the greatest New York screenwriter, along with probably Woody Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like Hannah and her sisters in Manhattan, along with She's Gotta Have It and Do the Right Thing. Any left for you?
I got three. Manhattan, because it's Manhattan, and not just because it's named after a borough, but because it's so beautiful, and because every time you see it, like every 10 years, you're a little bit older and it means something different, and you cry at the ending for whole different reasons than you did, 20 years ago. And Rosemary's Baby, because I think it's about the neighbors, and how they make you crazy, and they're nuts. And what is that, a zither? What are they playing on the wall? And of course it's because they're worshiping Satan, and it's about real estate, and it's about wanting to get ahead. And when he comes home and he says, that shirt that was in the New Yorker, I bought it. And they're just so striving, and that's genius. And Naked City, because it was the first one that shot on real locations, and the body that they find at the beginning is on my block. And every time I walk past that building, I'm like, hey, Naked City shot here. And I walked by it a couple weeks ago. Somebody was shooting a student film, and I said, they shot Naked City right in front of this building. Fritz Lang, I'm just saying. And that's something that we in this room get, that that thing where you're watching a movie and you say, oh my God, that doesn't happen with other cities. That doesn't happen with Lansing, Michigan,
Wait for the next panel, writing Lansing.
There you go.
I think on that note, I'd like to take some questions from the audience if we have some. Don't be shy. Yes, back there. Yeah.
They're New Yorkers. They're not going to be shy.
Yeah, no. Oh, yeah, wait for the mic, actually. There's because the streaming, yeah.
Well, you're talking about New York as site-specific. Now I think one thing that's changed about New York, it's not only site-specific, but it's also so many ethnicities are here that now it creates a whole new subgenre. Do you find that the case, and do you exploit that fact that, you can have, in Queens, you could have 50 different kinds of movies because of all the different communities that are there?
I mean, his movie, Premium Rush, right? I mean, you go into a lot of different communities in that movie, sort of very specifically.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. It's true. Okay, no, I mean, you do.
Chinatown.
I don't have anything great to add. Why did you tell me I had to answer that? That's Schiff's, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
But do you find yourself, in the case of your film, but how about the rest of you? Do you find yourself exploiting that richness of cultural diversity?
Well, Koepp's movie. No, because you really do. I mean, it's the thing that She's Gotta Have It did, which showed me in New York that I hadn't seen before, right? A way people spoke that hadn't been codified on film, and then it suddenly was. And I think you went into this Chinatown gambling world in a way that hasn't right now been seen, and the world of, what did you find that by being here? How did you find that?
We certainly could research it, which is great. So like anything you're curious about, if you're curious about underground clubs in Chinatown, where they gamble a lot. I'd heard about that because my wife's a journalist, and her beat was Chinatown at one point, and so she was telling about these cops who got called to break up this mahjong game, and it sounded really interesting. So you can just go and look at it, and it's all really close. More specifically for me was Carlito's Way, which was about Spanish Harlem in the 70s. Clearly not where I grew up, but the author of the book could take me around, and I found he was pointing to a lot of like places on the sidewalk and saying, that's where Spanish Raymond died. They were all squares of cement and stuff. But you can, it's incredibly rich, and it's rich within a few blocks. So it's not like you got to get on a plane and go someplace. You can. I remember one day on that movie researching, in Spanish Harlem. Meeting a lot of people involved in nefarious trades, and then going to have lunch with the producer at the Friars Club. And that's just how do you dress for that day? So yeah, It's incredibly rich.
Just wait for the mic. It's coming around. We have over there on the stairs.
You mentioned how the city has changed over the years. How has that affected buildings that you might have written in one scene, suddenly no longer there? Whole neighborhoods have changed. How does that affect the way a New York writer sees New York?
I'm not sure if the mic was working, so I'll just, for the people online, I'll repeat. It was a question about how really the changing landscape of New York affects how you write about New York. A building that was there one day and is gone, a neighborhood that changes completely, like a lot of neighborhoods have.
We're having trouble with this question.
Well, I mean,
Usually, I'd say like the gestation period of a movie isn't that long. I'd say usually when you jump in, it's not going to change in the 3 to 6 to 9 months you're going to make the movie. I guess some movies you work on for a while and put away and come back, but I guess it'd have to be a pretty specific change, like if there was some landmark building, or
If you did Rosemary's Baby and they tore down the Dakota.
yeah.
Before you
Well, now
filmed-
nobody could afford the Dakota, right? So
Yeah.
It's more it's more a directing issue, really, because like the time from when you scout something, and you fall in love with something, then invariably 3 weeks later you get a call that the scaffolding's gone up. Scaffolding's this blight that you spend your directorial career trying to avoid until you just embrace it, and then they take it down. So it's but yeah, it's not quite that fluid.
But that means you have to write in the present time. You can't do a period piece. It affects how you.
Well, sure you can through the miracle of computers.
The magic of the movies.
Yeah. And also, the architecture here is much more permanent than you'd think. I mean, Fifth Avenue hasn't changed all that much, So it's, and they can, we can make it look like anything.
in the front here. Yeah.
Do you
Just wait for in case it's actually working now. So.
do you ever set a movie or think about setting a movie specifically not in New York for sort of the contrast that sort of I'm tired of writing all these New York movies?
Well, I think all these guys have written movies in other cities, but
Right.
yeah, sometimes it's just where the story sort of dictates. If it's some kind of government thriller, it could often be in D.C. Sometimes it's something that has to be in L.A. or Vegas for a certain kind of a heist movie. Sometimes, you're pretty specific because you want to stay home for a period of time when you're making a movie. And if you're lucky enough to pull it all off and get the financing in New York, you can stay home and make a movie, which is the greatest thing.
But I mean, I don't think I make that distinction sort of ahead of time. It's how a story announces itself. How a story announces itself to you often has a sense of place attached to it.
I think you also get, if I may, to answer that, it's also very refreshing to write for someplace else, and location's the biggest character in your script a lot of the time. So that really, and you see it in Woody Allen, obviously wanted to go somewhere else and was invigorated by the places he went, which gives you a whole new creative lease on life.
I want to thank the panel for adding to the aura that New York has, and through the years we've changed, but it's still the place to be for everybody, and everybody wants to come here and make it. Like Frank Sinatra said. But I wanted to comment on what we've touched upon, 9/11, government, and the future of New York as it changes, because I feel that it's going to be a real estate gold rush once the Freedom Tower goes up. That's the new landmark that we're all going to look at in the skyline. And I wanted to emphasize the fact that nobody's really told the story of the government of New York City through the future, the mayor versus the governor versus the president, how we have changed our landscape in the aspect of cycling, our health, our public health, our transportation issues, and overcoming that. And so I wasn't sure if you see that as the next stepping stone, or if we're going to continue doing Friends, a sitcom based in New York, and this imaginary place that doesn't exist for most New Yorkers.
Well, that's, I mean, The answer is you should make that movie.
Yeah, that's your.
That's the answer, right? I mean, Sidney Lumet made those movies when he was alive and making films, and I'll tell you, Dave and I've read. People have tried to make pilots about mayor, governor, the changing of New York. People, getting financing is really difficult, and for movies sometimes. But if you write a compelling enough, this is the optimist. Write a compelling enough thing and be determined enough to make it. Tell your story. That's very, I don't think there's people graft movements onto things afterwards, but I think artists just are attracted to the stories that they want to tell and then try to tell them the truest way that they know how to. And so I'm sure someone will do that, and hopefully it'll be you.
Yeah, there's a couple in the back there. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering if you guys had either a most favorite or least favorite New York movie cliche.
Well, I guess people have made a lot of the cab always being there in a movie.
Yeah, or the light being wrong on the cab. If it's, please, the off-duty lights, it's not that hard of a concept. You've just got to think it through. And you don't ever see the cab pull up with the off-duty light and the taxi light on, and the guy has to lean down and, audition for the driver about where he's going. And would that be on your way, or is that a problem? So that, those little specifics that when you live in a place really bug you. What else? We could probably live without a hot dog cart, I think, for a while. In movies.
I think that was one of the late Gene Siskel's bugaboos, was that every time there was any kind of chase scene in New York, they always ran through a hot dog cart. That was, and in the green shirt there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm surprised you didn't mention Midnight Cowboy as a quintessential New York movie, that it was not your favorite. Is Midnight Cowboy impossible to do today in New York?
I actually thought about that not too long ago. Part of Midnight Cowboy, lest we forget, was the only X-rated Best Picture winner. And now, of course, it wouldn't even be a hard R, and it might be PG-13, and it's so much of the point of there was a pathos to Midnight Cowboy, of course, in the relationship between those two characters, and finally the death of Ratso Rizzo towards the end. But so much of that was based on the shock of New York, the licentious, lascivious, ugly, that's kind of 70s New York. That really, it isn't what it looks like anymore. So, I sort of, and the naivete of the kid from nowhere coming to the big city. Such a great eternal theme, the city mouse, right? The country mouse coming and the city mouse. But in a certain way, in an era of intense, constant information about everything, and of TMZ, and we are hard to shock now. And that one point about Midnight Cowboy, New York as shocker, I think that'd be very hard to recreate now. Yeah, I think so.
Well, actually, I guess I'm sort of compelled to come back to that subject about whether the shoe still fits without the grit, because even though when I mentioned David Simon earlier, there was a sort of pile on to say, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but the all those movies that you guys mentioned when I asked you about the quintessential New York movies or your favorite New York movies were pretty gritty, Naked City and Taxi Driver.
Not Hannah and not Manhattan.
No, but
and not Rosemary's Baby.
But
other than that,
you
your point is
you mean the couple of them that'll prove your point?
But I guess the question, it does, I haven't seen David Premium Rush yet, but it does sound like you do get into a kind of a criminal underworld in that. Do you have to, do you feel like you have to look harder to find the grit now in New York? Is it that it's there, but it's just sort of been, cosmetically concealed in a way in the post-Giuliani years?
I think you're trying to make the premise work, and I think there is grit, and some stories are gritty stories, and some stories are not. I mean, I also love The Thin Man and Top Hat, and those are New York movies, even though they were shot in Culver City. But sorry about that. But again, there is a whole range of human experience, and at the risk of derailing this, can I just quickly tell a John Schlesinger story to answer your Midnight Cowboy question?
By all means.
It has nothing to do with anything. But in my younger years, I was developing a script with John Schlesinger at Orion when they existed. And we were in a development meeting, and it wasn't going very well, and Schlesinger didn't have the patience that he used to have. And I saw he was bald, and his whole head started to turn red as they gave notes on what we thought the story ought to be. And the notes were very much pushing it, mainstream, and it had some kind of controversial elements to it that the studio didn't like, and they were trying to push it away from that. And Schlesinger's head was just on fire. It was so red. And finally he said, I have an idea for a story. How about a pathetic gigolo who comes to New York and meets this moronic homeless man, and the story reaches its emotional climax when the gigolo is blown in a cinema. Why don't you test that in a shopping mall? That's so anyway.
But,
That's a good story.
But for your premise, I mean, wasn't it you're talking about in Manhattan, maybe? I mean, you got to separate New York from the other boroughs because
I don't know, because I
3 weeks ago, how many murders were there and people shot 3 weeks ago? What was the number?
There was like 40.
48 people. Is that not gritty enough? I mean,
no, I think.
There were 40 people shot. Yeah, only 4 of them died, I guess, which is a disappointment.
No, but I mean, I do think. I mean,
people have to practice their marksmanship.
But the other more.
But no, Koepp's story. The point that Koepp's story actually really makes is that the lack of grit isn't from it being dusted over in New York. It's because it's not, sought after in Hollywood.
Saleable.
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah. That's that. Yeah.
And that goes back to what the other gentleman was saying too. That there's a word that you can almost not say in Hollywood now. The D word, drama.
Yeah.
Don't try to get a drama made. So what you're talking about City Hall. City Hall was a movie, but it couldn't be now. I don't think it'd be very hard. It'd be an indie. You'd have to get a completely
cable
independent
TV show now.
Yep, that's right. That's so. We look. Don't go to those Marvel Comics movies. Go to
even though David wrote Spider-Man,
and they take place in New York. So
there's a new thing.
Go to this bicycle movie.
They will make a drama now. The new thing, because Social Network changed a lot of things. They will make a drama. The thing is, it's got to cost 40 or less.
Yeah.
It has to have great big stars working for not their whole fee, and because Social Network worked and Moneyball worked. And so apparently the third corollary is Aaron Sorkin has to write it. So if you can get like that, then then they'll do it. But otherwise, you're right. There you go. Studios won't anyway.
We have time for a couple more out here. Maybe here in the front, or we'll go there and then there. Yeah.
So I always think of one of the grittier places in New York, and I'm not a native either, but I've been here 30 years, as the subway. Not to devolve into trivia, but do you have you shot some of your scenes using the subway? Do you have a movie that has a favorite subway scene? I'm just curious. That's a gritty part of New York for me. One I see every day, but
yeah, I mean, we shot a quick scene in a subway, and we stole the shot, so that was exciting for us. We went running down there with like the battery packs and the DP had the camera.
Because they will bust you fast.
Yeah.
That was
so just pulling that off is the fun part.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
The MTA is a little bit hard to deal with. They want to help, but they know that they're not often cast in a great light in your movies, so they're not that. There's a woman who runs the movie liaison is Albertine. And she's tough as nails. And I did a short once it was like a PSA thing, for it's like a health film for schools kind of thing with New York City schools. So she was very, very supportive about that. And they let you shoot, but they want to put you on the shuttle, from Grand Central Penn Station. And it's fine, except anybody who has ever ridden the subway says, oh, they're on the shuttle. And it makes no sense that they're on the shuttle, and it's a very short ride back and forth. So enterprising filmmakers try to steal it. Or you got to really work with them, you know, and go to like their subway class and you know, shoot only at nights. It's tough, but it is a great location. It looks great, it sounds great, it feels great. The original Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 for me was, you know, it was great because it got not only like what it looks and feels like and what you imagine the people are like, but the humor. New Yorkers are really funny. We're funny. We're funnier than any other city. We really are. Because, you know, there's a blasé humor when you're walking down the street, you know, the guy who looks over my shoulder and criticizes my shot, we're just funny. I don't know, there's a dryness that's there, and that movie really got it.
I was thinking of Pelham. There's another subway scene that I always like. Not that it's in a great movie, but it did show New Yorkers in a particular way, and there's no subway in it, it's just on a platform. And that's the last scene in Crocodile Dundee where he's talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that subway.
A great New York movie made by Australians. I think, David, you wrote uncredited on the Pelham remake, am I correct?
Yeah, but that wasn't, but they did a different script.
No, okay.
It was fine. It was just, didn't work out, Scott. Didn't work out. What do you fucking want? I don't understand. You used to be at a different publication from what I understand. What happened with that?
It happens.
Found us went with the deep dive there. He busted you.
Yeah, they're here in the front, yeah.
Specifically for the guys who moved from Colorado and the Midwest, are there things that you did when you moved here to help assimilate the city?
Did you get mugged?
I have never been mugged. No, I didn't get mugged. I did ride the subway. We put a nice scene in the subway in Wall Street, too, where someone committed suicide in the subway. You know, you walk this. This is a walking town. You walk the streets. You know, you go into delis and you walk the streets and you drink it in. You go to clubs. You go to restaurants. You know, New York is like a giant secret society, but it's also extremely assimilable. You know, and you just listen to people. You listen to them talking about stuff. You listen to them saying, "I'm taking the shuttle," and you say, "What? You know?" And it means a specific thing. And pretty soon, you know, it's, I guess we're a city of sponges, you know, and we're sponges who came from somewhere else, and we absorb and absorb and absorb, and that's what writers do anyway. So it's a great place to be a writer.
Right after I moved here, I had a movie come out that I had high hopes for, and it died like a dog in the street. Terrible, horrible death. Nobody went. And I went out for a walk that lasted about 6 hours, and I knew I loved this place because nobody knew. Nobody gave a shit, you know, and I lived in LA for a long time where I would have run into people who would have said, "I'm really sorry your movie died." You know, and you know, knowing that their joy is so hard for them to contain, but that, you know, they're making that effort for you, and that means that they care, kind of. You know, and I just, there's great comfort in anonymity, and there's great comfort in being able to have a little perspective and see that, you know, your movie died. There's really lots bigger problems in the world, and you know, you can, I don't know, it's just a great place to live.
I think we have time for maybe one more. I'll go over here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to have the chance to ask the question. We spend a lot of time talking about New York spirit and New York language, New York atmosphere, and New York humor, everything. This is very personal, but I just wonder, has anyone considered to write a movie about the people who don't necessarily speak New York language, who don't always understand New York humor, and who tried hard, very hard, and who may just not, I mean, who have a hard time even pass as a remotely marginal New Yorker. But who
As
is...
Brian said, you should write that.
Yeah.
I
Are you
do.
having a hard time?
I
It's
do.
gonna be okay.
And I do have story ideas, maybe I can share with you. I mean, but these kind of people are not, I guess, as the first gentleman who asked question mentioned, we have more and more these people in the city, and they are not gigolos, and they are not necessarily homeless, and they are not maybe food delivery man. I just wonder, has anyone considered to write these kind of movies
It's
about
interesting.
them.
One of the film festival and the IFP did this thing where they picked 25 young filmmakers and called it Emerging Visions. And one of those guys, his first name is Will. I don't remember his last name right now. Has a film, and it's online. But if you look at the 25, you can find it in the brochures here. Look at the 25 filmmakers. One of them has this 5 interconnected story thing, and 1 or 2 of those stories is about what you're talking about. Is about someone who doesn't really speak the language and is trying to assimilate, but it's not in any of those like jobs. It's a regular person who kind of gets caught up, and it's exactly on point. I just saw it yesterday, but my memory is shot for some reason. I can't remember the name of it. But if you go and look at the filmmaker Will in the 25 Emerging Visions, you'll see. Will McCord. Do you remember the name of that? What's the name of his? Casual Encounters, and one of the segments in it, or 2 of them, is about that. So you can find the trailers for that online.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
I think we have to stop there, but I want to thank David, Brian, David, and Stephen for being here on this panel.
Thank you, Scott.